So this video is going to be a basic introduction to neuroanatomy. So let's get started. So for those of you who don't know what neuroanatomy is, it's the anatomy of the brain. Anatomy of the brain. And NS is just the nervous system. So neuroanatomy is the anatomy of the brain and the entire nervous system. So when it comes to neuroanatomy, we're going to start with the brain. The command center of neuroanatomy, of the nervous system, and basically the entire body. It's controlled by your brain. So, and your brain has a line running down like this. So we're going to do a superior view of the brain, which will give us, so we're going to start off with the parts of the brain. So over here in this part of the brain, we have mental, right? And this basically focuses on concentration, judgment, creativity. That all comes from here. And that's the mental area. Mental functions of the body comes from this part of the brain, that's right here, which is right over here at the top of the brain. And that is also called the frontal lobe. Right, so that's the frontal lobe. So, and that the job is obviously creativity, judgment, concentration, planning, etc. So we're going to move on. The next area is where mainly the eye movement and orientation. So eye movement occurs over here. So basically the movement of the eyes, the orientation of the eyes, as we close our eyes. So closing, opening of the eyes. That's that area of the brain. And over here we have the area where most of your motor skills are developed, the motor function area of the brain, which is just muscle movement and initiation of muscles. So muscle movement happens over here. Right below that, we have the parietal lobe. And the parietal lobe is important in many different ways. It's a sensory area. So when someone touches you, that's the parietal lobe. It gets activated and it knows that someone's touching you. So parietal. When you touch something, that's also the use of parietal lobe. It creates a sensation that you're touching something. Let's say you touch a computer, like I'm touching a computer right now. Right now, the parietal lobe is giving a sensation that I am touching a computer, and gives a sensation when I'm touching. Different things feel differently. So that's all work of the parietal lobe. One of the most important parts of the brain. Over at the bottom, we have the occipital lobe. And this lobe is designed for sight and image perception. So that's designed for sight at the bottom. And then we also have on top of it and this is called the somatosensory association area, which is the evaluation of texture, temperature, recognition of certain things. So if someone shows you an apple, you know, and it's like almost like in memory, you know it's going to be an apple. When someone shows you the color red, you know it's going to be a color. It's basically recognition of different things and like evaluating weight. Like if you feel heavy or you feel light, that's what you're gonna do. So basically evaluation of different things. Evaluation. And this part of the brain is most likely the two small parts right here, which is written language. Like when someone shows you a language, you're able to comprehend what language it is, and so the ability to speak different languages all comes from here. So without this part of the brain, you would not be able to speak languages. So like I'm speaking English right now, it's because of this part of the brain. Also referred to as Wernicke's area. That's language. All right. So we know the different parts of the brain. So now, let's focus on the nervous system, also another important part of the brain. So, I'm trying to do my best job here. The brain, if this is a human body in anatomical position, the brain is going to be right here. Right? That's where the brain is going to be. And the spinal cord runs down on the brain. This is why if the spinal cord breaks, you'll most likely die. Because the spinal cord basically connects the brain. Also an extremely important part of the body. And now we have two different things. We have CNS and PNS. CNS is central nervous system. You've probably heard of this. And this one is the peripheral nervous system. So the central nervous system is tasked with and receives information, like sensory information almost. And the nervous system in general is tasked with sending messages to the body. The central nervous system is made of the brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system is the nerves around it. So if you didn't know, your body has lots of different nerves run all around the body. So basically, this is what your body looks from the inside. There's lots and lots of nerves around the body. So the peripheral nervous system is like muscle movement stuff, and the central nervous system is basic stuff. Like if someone you see someone you haven't seen before, you're like, oh, I don't know this person. Or you see someone you're familiar with, the central nervous system knows, oh, that's the person I'm familiar with. That's the difference between central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. And of course, you have the nerves running down the body. And yeah. So we're going to do another representation of the brain. This time, it's going to be in a different position. So from the side, that's how the brain would look. So the brain is actually a lot different from what most people imagine. So, and this will actually cover a lot more parts of the brain. Alright. This is what the brain looks like in reality, and this is actually called the brain stem. Brain stem, that's right over here. This thing running down. This thing right here is the anatomy of the cerebellum is so complex that I can't just explain it in this video. And this is called a cerebellum. It's like the bottom side of the brain. And again, we already know the different parts of the brain. That. And we have other parts that we're going to focus on here, since we can see a lot more of the brain in this area. So your brain is basically composed of a lot of different pieces. And when we look at in superior view, we can't see too many of them, but here we're going to see a lot of them. So over here, obviously, you have the frontal lobe. Right, the frontal lobe we already talked about. It's concentration, judgment, and emotional expression. So if you're sad or you might cry, that's the frontal lobe at work. So we have more parts here. We even have here, then we have part here, and there's lots of different parts. But there's even a part that goes over here, and then over here, part that surrounds it. And in the back we have the occipital lobe, which is the visual area that we discussed in the other example. And that's cerebellum down below. And in the top we also have a tiny corner right over here. And that's just, this extension is a part of a parietal lobe. So lots of things going on here. We're going to go one by one. So this right here is Broca's area. And this part of the brain is muscle and more of like body language, sort of. So that's basically body language. And then this right here is the basically, yeah, I don't know how to pronounce it, but cerebral cortex. So the cerebral cortex is tasked with, as we discovered, the cerebral cortex is movement of the eyes. So closing eyes, that's the thing we discovered in the last example of the brain. That's called a cerebral cortex. Over here, we have right next to it is, again, the area where most of your motor skills are developed, in the function area, which is muscle movement. muscle movement. And over here we have the parietal lobe. Extremely important part of the brain. Again, this is all the sensory information. You know, very basic stuff. So if someone touches you, parietal lobe. Very important part of the brain. Above, right here in the parietal lobe, we have the basically evaluation, as we talked of. So that I'll put a little bit up here. Evaluation. And over here, this part right here is Wernicke's area, as I showed in the last video, not the last video, the last example, which is language, comprehension and understanding, language. Over here we have the occipital lobe, which we discovered in the last example. Occipital lobe is in that area. And over here, we have not talked about this yet. This is the area, this is basically short-term memory. So like if someone watches this video right now, once it's uploaded, someone watches the video, they're gonna remember it but then they might forget it like next day if they don't keep thinking about it. So that's basically what this area does right here. And yeah, that's basically the anatomy of the brain, and that's just the extreme basics of neuroanatomy, because the brain is so complex from the inside that people are still discovering new things today. So hopefully this video was helpful, and yeah, that's Introduction to Neuroanatomy.